Okay, I believe we are live. Today it's going to be a hangout, and I forgot to send the invite 5 minutes previous. It's my bad. So I think I'm just going to have to wait for my guest to pop by. Let me check to make sure that we are live. We are live. We are good. Looks like I'm talking to myself. Okay. Oh, hey. Oh, nice. There are others here. This is brilliant. Hey guys, how's it going? Would you look at this? Would you look at
Hello,
this? How's it going, buddy?
I'm doing all right. Biani Bash, Johnny.
Johnny, what's going down, buddy?
Uh, it's morning here in Kurdistan.
Okay. Let me just go ahead and say, as up front, we are live as of this moment. I apologize for giving you the link late. I wanted to spend a few moments before on air, so that's my bad. My apologies. Quick introduction. I'm going to go by Lux. What shall I call you?
You know, I get all kinds of things. I usually go by my middle name, Otto, but for weird reasons, the YouTube name uses my legal first name, Jonathan. So either is fine.
Which do you prefer?
I prefer going by my middle name, which is Otto.
Then
But
we're going to go.
it might be confusing because the name on my YouTube account is Jonathan. So.
That's completely fine. We're going to go with Otto. All right. So Otto, um, the the impetus for this was something to the effect of you lived in London from 2001 to 2004, and you were also making mention, if I recall correctly, something about how there were identity issues within Iraq relative to the Kurds and another group. Um, I'm very interested in hearing about these things. Which do you want to discuss first?
Well, why don't we do London because it's chronologically long before I got here to Iraq.
I'll take it. I like it. Let's go ahead and spend some time on London. What were your experiences?
Well, I did my postgraduate work, my master's degree and PhD, fairly late. I was 31 when I started. So it was 2001. I went to do a Master's of Arts in African and Asian history at the School of Oriental and African Studies, and then I did a PhD right after that at the same institution.
Ethnic studies.
So
I have to ask, did you dye your hair pink or something?
no, no, no.
Okay, I couldn't help it. I couldn't
The
help it.
School of Oriental and African Studies. It's well known in some parts of the world, like Ghana, and basically unknown in other parts. But when the British in 1916 looked like they were going to take the Arab provinces of the Ottoman Empire, they panicked because they didn't have anybody trained for administrating the territories for what would be the League of Nations mandates. So they created the School of Oriental and African Studies in the University of London to train colonial administrators, particularly language. So originally their emphasis was Arabic language to train colonial administrators to take over Iraq, which Transjordan and Palestine.
So it sounds as though the idea was to. Okay, so the context of that was it had to do with the Ottoman Empire, the Brits going in to secure those lands, and they wanted people to basically be able to run the show. And so
Yeah,
then they just had to train people on customs, the language, and the general culture. Am I understanding that correctly?
that's correct. Yes.
Okay, cool. If you don't mind my asking, why did you take that study course?
Well, after I did my undergraduate, I did a short period of time for graduate school in the U.S., and then I dropped out before getting a degree. And then I kicked around California for a while where I had family. And I wrote a couple of academic books that got published. And I guess both of them got noticed from a guy that was a professor at the School of Oriental and African Studies. and he invited me to do a conference presentation with him at Columbia University. And so he got me into the program. And at the same time, my grandmother, who was still alive at the time on my father's side, had like just enough money for me to do it if I cut a year off. So normally a PhD would be 3 years, but I did it in 2. So the total program was 3 years. So the guy got me in. I was working a minimum wage job at a coffee shop, probably not too far from where Norvin lives. I was over in Curtis Park at Cafe
Nice.
Melange. And the money was there. My first wife had just left me. So I figured, what the hell not?
Sorry, I just had some kombucha. My apologies.
No problem.
And so it kind of sounds like it was more or less a lark. That's what it kind of sounds like. You just sort of went for it for the sake of it because it was there.
Well, I mean, I've been trying to get back into graduate school, but I wasn't having any success. But in the British system, uh, accomplishments like publications are weighed far heavier than a networking and pedigree like they are in the U.S.
Fair enough. Fair enough. So, what was what were your experiences like in London? I mean, was it what you expected?
Uh, I had only been to London once, and it had been like 14 years before that. I like was 16. Uh, and when I went to London in the 80s, it was still fairly British. But yeah, by the time I got there, I left the week after 9/11. Uh, and I didn't come back to the U.S. for a number of years. And at that time, I think the statistics they were giving me that London was only 70% white English at that point.
Jeez.
But
Wow.
it seemed like there was a lot less because I was in the center of the city.
Yeah.
And I was at a university that specialized in the study of Asia, the Middle East, and Africa. And so most of the particularly graduate students were coming from those countries sponsored by their governments.
Oh, yeah.
Uh, and, there are areas like off of Hyde Park, there's an area that's all Arab. And I lived for a while near the cemetery where Marx is buried, Highgate, and it's all Caribbean. So sometimes, you thought that, well, where are all the British people? But you find them in the pubs, traditional type English pubs. You would find the British people. But yeah, as far as it moving to a kind of international cosmopolitan city, that had already happened by the time I arrived.
Yeah, my grandmother went to I she went to London, I think in 2003, but I don't recall fully. I mean, obviously it was quite some time ago. And I was shocked, I was stunned when she was complaining about how few British people there were and how basically she went to the Middle East. That wasn't the shocking part. The shocking part was that my family chided her for being racist. I was like, wait, what? But she went to London. I would expect to see British people there, not Pakistanis. And so, well, actually, no, I guess I was kind of shocked at the at all the Pakistani people being there. A bit of my one half of my family, they're a bit of they're kind of Anglophiles. And so, of course, when the side that my grandmother, the one that went to London, she was the side that were Anglophiles. So when she went over, yeah, I was expecting to hear all these discussions about how quaint and doily it was or whatever. Meanwhile, yeah, she got a very different experience. Oh, that's right, because it was after 9/11, and that side of my family, they're mostly Republicans. It would have been doubly shocking for her. Yeah. Oh, sorry, that's kind of weird. I'm talking about myself now, or talking about my own life
So
experience. But anyway, please go on. What was it like to live in London in sort of a non-British environment?
uh, I was an academic, so I mean, I spent most of my time working on my PhD dissertation. Uh, but the main thing you notice in London is it's very expensive
Yeah.
uh, compared to other parts of Europe. And when I got some time to go on vacation, it was cheaper for me to fly down to Italy. I went to Bologna than to go anywhere in UK, particularly the Celtic region. Scotland is just outrageous.
Oh, geez. That sucks. Uh,
And like even to buy a pair of shoes, it's almost cheaper to like go and fly to Italy and buy come back.
oh God, that sucks. That sounds so lame. I wouldn't like that at all. That would discourage me from going outside. Did you make any did you make any friends? What kind of friends did you have? Who did you hang out with?
Actually, my best friend, kind of strange, was a Palestinian guy, and the way I met him was the most bizarre thing. I was in what they call the junior common room, which is the room above the student pub. And I guess mostly undergraduates hang out there and smoke fags and drink warm, milky tea. And this guy addresses me, and he has an American accent, not a British accent. And he says, "You want to go busk on the subway for money?" And at that time, I didn't know what busk meant.
That's funny.
I said, "Busk? What is that?" He said, "Oh, I'll play the drum and you can sing and we'll beg for money." I said, "Mate, I can't sing worth a damn." I said, "Okay, that's fine. Well, why don't we just go get a couple of beers and something to eat?" And I said, "All right." And he was he was born in Kuwait of Palestinian parents, but he grew up in California, so we had that kind of California connection. And I spoke, unlike some of the British, he spoke understandable English.
Nice. What kind of I mean, was he Muslim? Was he Christian? What was he?
He was nominally Muslim, but very secular. And you know the thing about in Hyde Park that was Tommy Robinson.
Yeah.
At that time, there were the Salafists, the wackos there speaking as well, and there were also some American Christian fundamentalists. And this guy, he liked to go and take the piss out of the Muslim Salafists, and I told him that's that. You know, it's one thing to do it as a Christian because they won't hurt you, but these guys are like serious wackos. They could hurt you. He said, but you know, I'm in London. You know, the British police here protect. I said, yeah, but these guys are absolutely crazy, and you're not going to convince them. He said, well, I'm not trying to convince them. I'm trying to convince if there are other Middle Easterners around that my way is a better way for the future than theirs. And one weekend he didn't come back, and I said, what happened? He said, you were right. Those guys went crazy, and they tried to attack me with a knife, and I had to go to the police and court and get a restraining order.
Yeah, that sounds about right. The you're pronouncing it Salafi. Is that the Arabic pronunciation?
I guess my Arabic is horrible. I speak a little bit of Kurdish, but Kurdish is a totally different language. It's related to Persian.
Where did you pick up the pronunciation Salafi?
Well, how do you pronounce it?
Salafist.
Salafist? I don't know.
Just curious. It's obviously not a big deal. I don't mind in the least. For all I know, I'm the one mispronouncing it.
But you know, Arabic, the pronunciations, even within Iraq, vary from place to place. And if you go to Morocco, it's completely and totally different again. And
Oh yeah, yeah.
so I mean, there is no single spoken Arabic dialect.
Yeah, yeah. The well, for the people listening, um, Otto is referring to what I call Salafism, and Salafism is is it associated with Wahhabism? Do you know?
No, well, yeah, it's associated. Salafism is basically what they call themselves, and it's basically a fundamentalist Islamic movement to go
Oh,
back
that's
to
right.
the original text of the Quran and the Hadiths and the Sunnah, which is the tradition of how Muhammad and his family lived, and get rid
Yeah,
of stuff that was added later, primarily by the Ottoman Empire.
yeah,
And the Wahhabism is an outside term, and it's actually invented by the French. It refers to the movement in the 18th century by Abdul Wahhab to impose the kind of fundamentalist re-going back to the basics of Islam within the Arabian Peninsula, which was accompanied by a full-scale political revolt against the Ottomans. And Muhammad Ali, who was a vassal but basically independent in Egypt, had to go and send a large military across the Red Sea to suppress the Wahhabists on behalf of the Ottomans.
Jeez. Yeah, anytime they go fundamentalist, they just go nuts. Um, Point of reference, incidentally, for the people listening, this is amusing. If I recall correctly, and I think I do, the word Salafist or Salafi had, I think the meaning is friends or friend, and the concept is that they are going back to the friends of Muhammad. So you are living the life that the people around Muhammad would have lived. That's the concept. So whenever you see something like Friends of Muhammad, that's sort of like it's possibly code for Salafism, just as a funny aside. Anyway, so what else? What was your general experience in London like? I mean, I'm mostly curious about what it was like on a cultural level, because the difference between the England that I knew and I grew up with, which was of course back in the 1980s, when it was still like 80%, 90% Brits, indigenous Brits. It's very different, obviously, from the 70% that you experienced, and now I think they're down to between 50 and 40% indigenous Brits in London. So you caught it at the halfway point.
Yeah.
Um, did you said that you went to London before?
Yeah,
Uh,
I'd been in London for a couple of weeks when I was like 16. But and then it was when I went for postgraduate study, I would have been 31. So there's a big difference. So a lot changed during that time.
can you talk about some of those changes?
Well, for one, there were a lot fewer British people around. Um, for two, I went there in the 80s first, and the big political issue, and you saw it at Trafalgar Square, was the anti-apartheid movement against South Africa. They had like a permanent uh, anti-South African demonstration there. And when I went back for postgraduate school, the big political issue was Palestine. And basically, they just switched out the names. So it'd gone from South Africa to Israel, and from the black population in South Africa to the Palestinian Arabs
Yeah.
in the West Bank and Gaza Strip. Uh, but I don't remember a whole lot from when I was there when I was 16, because we're talking now that over 30 years ago for me.
Yeah. Fair enough. Fair enough. Well, I want to go ahead and I guess since the general vibe that I'm getting from it is that your time in London was largely spent in books. Is that what I'm getting out of this?
A lot of it, yes. I mean, there was also plenty of degeneracy, but
Can you
uh,
put some of that?
I spent some time before I had to quit drinking on NHS orders at British pubs, and there it was still pretty much old school English. But kind of interesting. I didn't hear a lot of resentment against the Pakistanis, but there was a huge amount of racism against the blacks for some reason.
Huh.
Um, and then like every time I'd meet like some sort of European leftist, particularly the worst ones were the Germans, because the Germans just hate themselves. They think that like every atrocity against an ethnic German is justified because the Germans are the most evil people on the planet.
Good
And
God.
they would tell me like, no, 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 the worst racism in Great Britain is against Pakistanis. And I said, no, I don't hear that. I hear it against blacks.
So the Germans were arguing over who was getting the worst crap, and the Germans were expecting that they would be correct because they were the most evil. And
Yeah.
it's a very weird situation. That's a very weird situation. Did you know many German people while you were down there in London?
No. Uh,
Okay.
uh, uh, My supervisor was actually an American who was a specialist on Ottoman history. I did my PhD on Central Asia. I did it on comparative results in internal exile between ethnic Germans from the Volga and Ukraine and Crimean Tatars and Meskhetian Turks. And but I hung out mostly with the people that were doing the PhD at the same time with me.
Yeah.
And they divided into sections. And I was the only person doing what was called the Middle East, even though it was Central Asia I was doing. So for some reason, I ended up with the people doing Southeast Asia, which was, I think, three people. One of them was a son of a diplomat from Thailand, and he himself is now a diplomat. And he and his wife used to cook. And she keeps inviting me to go to Bangkok. I just keep putting it off. And then there was a British guy from Cornwall who was also doing Thai history, who's been in Thailand for decades now teaching. And so I used to hang out with them and one other guy who was a Sikh from India. And we were all doing the PhD at the same time. So
Sounds like a really weird group. I mean, it's just funny sounding. I guess it kind of makes sense if you're in the middle of London and in the middle of academia. There's something about the context that just kind of makes sense for some reason. Yeah, there's a very weird thing where they all seem to have like Middle Eastern and Indian people floating around. It's very odd. Sometimes it makes me wonder why. Like there seems to be some kind of I don't know, a fixation on the part of the Brits. It's strange. Anyway.
well, it's the colonial uh, ties. I mean, people go to where for migration to where they have knowledge, particularly language, but also knowledge of legal system and whatnot. So if you're coming from an area that was formerly ruled by Britain, it's easier to go to Great Britain or Canada than it is to go to
Oh,
France or the Netherlands.
that actually makes some sense. Yeah, that does make sense. There would be a little more, yeah, because you would have the yeah, there'd be like a cultural imprint somewhere, and there'd be some overlaps. Yeah, I guess that does make sense. Okay. Well, so is there anything else you wanted to talk about with regards to London?
If you have any questions, I mean, uh, before I went, I did read Peter Hitchens' book on the disappearance of Britain, and I think that it holds up even more so today as far as the traditional British culture disappearing than it did even back then, now 15 years ago.
Did you notice any signs of the decay of British culture in London? I mean, anything that jumped out at you at the time?
Uh, well, that there were so few British, um, that certain things were not working well. At the time I was there, which was under Blair, there was a strike by the fire department because they hadn't gotten a raise in many, many years. And so basically you had the whole fire department in the city of London go on strike, which I thought was not a very safe thing to happen.
No, it sounds terrible. Okay, so there were far fewer British people. The British people that were there, they seemed to be struggling. Um, yeah, so I guess it hints at discord or yeah, a lack of cleanly functioning society, especially the demographic shift. That would make sense. Is there anything that, in retrospect, that you caught on to that looked like an obvious sign of decay?
It wasn't a very clean city. Lots of garbage on the streets, and like on the weekend morning, just like vomit everywhere from like people binge drinking.
Oh God. Well, that's going to change when the Sharia patrols get around. So that'll be
You'd
nice,
be
right?
surprised how many people of Pakistani and Arab descent also drink a lot in Great Britain.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm joking when I say that. There's a funny thing that the radicals, they get a lot of the press. So your Anjem Chowdhury types, everyone knows who they are. But my friend Ahmed, the casual uh, Pakistani fellow down the block, doesn't get nearly as much press. Yeah, who's that guy? Majid Nawaz or something? Uh,
Yes.
he's pretty, in terms of how he conducts himself, he's pretty mainstream Civ Nash Brit when you think about his behavior patterns. And I do expect that that's. I mean, I think even he's kind of a radical in a way because the everything that I've seen, I don't know. It's really hard for me to gauge now that I think about it, because everything that I know about is basically a combination of like articles, posts on other blogs or comments on YouTube or like cell phone footage, and I get such a weird smattering. How religious were they? How religious were the Pakistanis and the other associated groups?
I didn't come across a lot of Pakistanis. I came across a lot more Bangladeshis.
Really?
Uh, yeah. Bangladeshis control all the Indian restaurants. They're not really Indian, it turns out.
Yeah.
Um, um, I knew a number of Arabs. The Arabs were split um, between the poor Arabs, basically Palestinian, Jordanian, Lebanese, and then the rich Arabs from places like Kuwait and Saudi Arabia. And they didn't get along at all. Uh, the most religious people were actually the converts. So like the white English guys that became Muslims were the most
Oh,
fanatical.
yeah, yeah. I heard
Uh,
Milo Yiannopoulos say that it was the gingers that were the big targets. Did you see anything like that?
yeah.
Okay, could you talk about that just for a moment?
I was hanging out in Hyde Park, and you would see these guys. There'd be like a mixed group of like Pakistani, Arab, and these converts. And at when it was time to pray, they would all like go and pray in the middle of the park, facing towards Mecca. Uh, but there was a surprisingly a large number of converts, much more than I would have expected.
That's interesting. There's a thing that I've been thinking about, which is that, okay, so recently I was on a stream that had a woman who lives in Britain on it, on the stream, and she was extolling the virtues of Islam. Uh, and I'm pretty sure she counts herself, she declares herself as an atheist, but she's an atheist that has decided that she wants to latch on to Islam for whatever reason. And one of the things that really stood out at me was that it really did resemble the classic case of a woman seeking power, seeking strength. And sometimes I wonder if some of these converts, it's mostly a matter of they recognize that the Western European culture is in a weakened state, as where the Islamic culture is in a very virile and almost young state. What do you think?
I think it's true. I had a conversation with he's now graduated, but a student at the institution I teach here, and he asked me a question about interpretation of the Bible. And it came up for somehow that a lot of mainstream religious, particularly Protestant, don't like interpret the Bible literally. They like look at it as a kind of metaphors and stories. And he says, "But that seems very weak because all Muslims, we just interpret it directly as the word of God given down. And if you got like men interpreting it, that makes it a much weaker. If you like came from Mars and looked at which is the more better religion, the one came directly from God or this one that's got all this human type of mushy interpretation, which one are you going to think is stronger?"
That's funny. That's a nice and compelling argument seen from a certain standpoint. Yeah, there does seem to be a kind of strength and resilience to that. It does seem to have some snap. I agree. All right, fair enough. Okay. I feel like at the moment I've kind of run out of questions for London.
Okay.
So I'd like to. I mean, if I have any others, I'll certainly ask. Um,
I just have one more thing on atheism and Islam because my area, especially for studying, was Central Asia. I ended up going to Central Asia for I taught in Kyrgyzstan for 4 years, and I went back every year in the summer when I was working in Ghana, and the first year here because my wife and daughter are still there. But in the Soviet Central Asian states, the Communist Party elite and much of the population will say they are atheists and Muslims because Islam became part of the national identification, what made a Kyrgyz or a Kazakh or an Uzbek. And so you get this where they take just like the Muslim burial and circumcision and a few other like just kind of symbolic elements as part of the national identity uh, as part of it. But then, like, of course, you still had the Soviet thing where you were officially atheist but a Muslim, and so you have like Uzbeks communists like drinking vodka toast to Islam and various very weird things.
that sounds really. That sounds very surreal. That sounds like you. Yeah, like atheists pretending to no Muslims pretending to be atheists.
Not so much that I mean, in both the Soviet Union and Yugoslavia, what happened was uh, Islam became a marker of certain ethno-national identities, which actually became racialized. But at the same time, it's an atheist state, so Islam become really the culture of it. And then it's only like certain symbolic things that were kept. In Central Asia, they only kept certain symbolic things from the beginning, anyways. So instance, they never took the veil in Kyrgyzstan. So basically, no Kyrgyz will eat pork pretty much, but they all drink. And they all say they're Muslim, but very few go to mosque. And they will all have their son circumcised, but none of them will pray 5 times a day.
Huh. Well, that sounds like a version of Islam that doesn't sound too bad, I guess. I mean, it sounds way better than what's going on in freaking Syria or whatever. Have
Yeah,
you met too many or many of these Kyrgyzstani people and interacted with them?
yeah. I lived in Kyrgyzstan for 4 years, and I went back every summer after that for 6 years. And my wife is Kyrgyz. I talked to her yesterday.
Huh.
And we have a house in Western Kyrgyzstan,
Yeah.
and so my daughter is still there growing up. So yeah, the Central Asians are all pretty much like that. But the Kyrgyz and the Kazakhs, because they're formerly nomadic, were never really Islamicized. I mean, basically what happened is the Chinese were moving west, and the Arabs were moving east. And the Arabs said to the Kyrgyz, "We'll help you fight against the Chinese, but you have to adopt our religion, give up worship of Tengri, which is the Mongol sky god." And then the Kyrgyz said, "Well, okay, but we can't wear the veil because our women can't shoot arrows from horses. They do that, and we can't give up alcohol because our national beverage kumis has a little bit of alcohol in it, and we can't do this or that." So basically, they negotiated where they just adopted what they wanted.
That sounds like a really good deal. I mean, that sounds like because usually I view Islam as being just straight ahead hostile. Don't want to deal with it, and that sounds like there's a little bit of the kind of wiggle room that I would want if I was going to start adopting like a religion. That sounds like they somehow met like exactly the right people during conquest or something. S- Hmm. All right.
That wasn't conquest. The Chinese were conquering them, and then the Arabs helped them stop the Chinese at the
Oh,
Battle of Talas, which is
right.
pretty far west. It's close to where my wife lives. And that's also where the Arabs got paper from. They stole it from the Chinese.
Oh, neat. That's funny. What were the Arabs using for written works?
Parchment, vellum.
Oh, okay. So just regular. Okay, that's cool. That's cool. All right. Um, okay. I still okay. So I guess I do want to hear a little more about just generally uh, if you have any recollections of this atheism. within the London population of Middle Easterners. Did you meet many atheists in
Well,
London?
there was my Palestinian friend, whom for a while I shared an apartment with over by the uh, Highgate Cemetery. Yeah, there were, but generally, they would say uh, that they were Muslim by background, and that literally, as far as any obligation, generally meant that just didn't eat pork.
Hmm. Okay. Yeah, because there's
Uh,
a thing that I heard about, and hold the thought, and please tell me about it momentarily. But yeah, I keep hearing little bits and pieces about how much of the Middle Eastern population in the UK, they're kind of turning secular. That's just what I've heard, though. I'm sorry, I cut you off. What were you saying?
no, I think that's true. The the ones that have been there a couple generations are more secular, but it's not even across ethnic groups. I think there's far more secularism among some of the Arab populations, particularly from the Levant, Palestinians and Jordanians,
Hmm.
than there is among the Pakistanis.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember I looked into the religiosity of various countries, and the Pakistanis were highly religious. I think it was the Pakistanis and the Afghans were the most religious in the Middle East generally, and then in Africa, I think it was the Somalis that were the most religious. So if you happen to get, I mean, I'm going from memory, and this is stuff that I looked up way back in like 2016. So obviously, I'm not, my memory is shot, so I don't really remember clearly. But yeah, what you're saying would kind of make sense that there would be a few more secular people from the Arabic areas. I don't know why that just strikes me as ringing true.
Um, in part because those particular Arabic areas, Palestine had a large Christian population, and until the 80s, with the rise of Hamas, uh, Christian-Muslim relations in that particular area were not bad. It only became bad in the late 80s.
What happened in the late 80s?
Hamas was formed.
What did they start doing?
They became basically a replacement for the secular Arab nationalist groups that were anti-Israel. So the PLO and the PFLP and the DFLP and some of these organizations had Christian leaders, like the PFLP under George Habash and also the DFLP, basically had failed completely. Arab nationalism, pan-Arabism, anti-Zionism had gotten nowhere. And so the Islamist movements had had success in Iran in 79, success in Lebanon, particularly in 82. And so now the rise of an Islamist movement in the West Bank and Gaza Strip, Hamas was able to say, look, you guys completely failed. We're going to take over and we're going to do it right. But that also meant that there was no room for the Christian minority either.
Oh God, what did they do to the Christian minority?
Well, they completely removed them from positions of leadership for one thing, and they pretty much marginalized them in a way that uh, hadn't been done in Palestinian society amongst itself previously.
Did the Christians did they start living under dimitude?
Well, most of them have left. Most of the Palestinian Christians, there are some still in the West Bank, but I don't think there. I think there are almost none left in Gaza under Hamas. I think everybody that could get out did.
Hmm. All right, all right. I do want to switch gears and ask about the Kurdistan thing, the Kurds rather. That's a subject that I know almost nothing about. And you had mentioned, so this is a switching of gears.
No problem.
Obviously, if I do have questions for anything else, I will ask because you seem very free about answering, and I'm very grateful. Thank you, by the way. Thank you for your time on this.
Oh,
I
no
appreciate
problem.
it. Yeah, you were saying something about how, and this kind of reminds me of some of the things that I looked into. What is it? I think it was the Treaty of Versailles or something like that. I think that's what I'm thinking of, where like
Treaty of Versailles was Germany after World War One.
yeah, and they just started carving up the Middle East
Now
along.
that's the Treaty of Sevres, which was replaced by the Treaty of Lausanne in 1923, and then the Sykes-Picot Agreement between the French and the British. Mark Sykes drew the borders. That's why Jordan has that long, funny tail. But
Mm,
I'm convinced perhaps he was related to my mother's side of the family because the last name is the same.
that's funny. That's really funny. So tell me about the border drawing, and tell me about the ethnic groups that either agree or disagree with the border drawings.
Well, I mean, the Ottoman Empire had been an Islamic dynasty under the uh, Osmans, and then of course it basically became under the rule kind of a military junta after 1908, and when Sultan Abdul Hamid II is forcibly retired, and so the Committee of Union and Progress, sometimes called the Young Turks Ittihadat, were in power for the last 10 years. And they try and make it more Turkic empire, but they lose World War One, after siding with the Germans and the Austrians, and they end up fleeing. And actually, all three of the members were assassinated by Armenian nationalists in retaliation for the Armenian genocide. No, I'm not sorry. Enver Pasha was killed by the Soviets in Central Asia. But the other two, Jalal Pasha was killed in Georgia, and the other one was killed in Germany by Armenian nationalists. But the British took over, came in through Iraq and came in through Palestine. And then, so the British and French cut up the Arab provinces. So Iraq, Transjordan, Palestine became British, and Syria and Lebanon became French League of Nations mandates. And then the Turkey became a republic under Ataturk, and they fought to get the borders that they have now. And they wanted actually Mosul here in the north of Iraq, but the British kept it. But at that time, there was a conflict as to what to do with the Kurds and Armenians. And the Treaty of Sevres, they were going to give Armenia would be an American League of Nations mandate, but of course the U.S. Senate wanted nothing to do with that. And there was going to also be a Kurdish one, but that didn't get anywhere either. And the Kurds here in northern Iraq, which is called southern Kurdistan, they say Bashur. There were groups of the British that wanted to make it separate from the rest of Iraq, but Gertrude Bell, who was in Baghdad, pushed hard to have a single Iraqi state because they wanted to join the oil in Basra and the oil in Mosul to an administrative center in Baghdad and have it all under one pro-British government. And in 1932, they gave Iraq independence under King Faisal, who was a Hashemite, and there were Hashemites on the throne in Jordan, Syria, and Iraq at one time.
What are Hashemites?
It's a dynasty. They came from Western Arabia, the Sharif of Mecca, but the current monarchy in Jordan are Hashemites, King Abdullah, and then King Hussein, and now King Abdullah II. But that was like the consolation prize. King Faisal originally had Syria, and they kicked him off the throne there, and he then became king of Iraq. And then after he died, his son was king of Iraq for a while, but then it became a republic.
Huh. Okay. Okay, so the Hashemites. So there's a. It sounds as though during the transition period, right after World War One, there was. What were the? Because I'm trying to get a gauge on the sense of. It just strikes me as interesting, the sense of identity in the Middle East, because what I understand, what I grew up with, were certain borders. And I understood, I came to understand in the mid 2000s that those borderlines that Europeans value and think are important are largely unimportant by a lot of the groups on the ground. I found out I had a family member who's in the military for a little while, and he was stationed against the Pakistan-Afghanistan border, and he was telling me that uh, the the military would try to guard the borders, but the general population, they didn't really care. So
Yeah,
they
it's
just
all Pashtun.
Yeah, exactly. They didn't give a rat's ass. They'd move around with no regard for what it was that the Western nations were trying to impose. Um, and that's what I'm mostly interested
Okay.
in.
Okay, Iraq, the borders were created by the British, and it was created, as I say, they wanted to unify the northern and southern oil with the central administrative city that would be loyal to the British. And so they favored the Hashemites, who were part of the Sunni Arab minority. Most of the Arabs in Iraq, because of Persian influence when the conflict between the Safavids and the Ottomans, converted to Twelver Shiism. So they're Shiite Arabs, most of the Iraqis. And then, of course, in the north, there's Kurdish. Now, Kurdistan is divided into four parts. In Iraq, it's called Bashur, or southern Kurdistan. That's and this area is basically pretty much. There are some Arabs, but not a lot. It's pretty much. It's far more Kurdish than was British when I was there. And then on the eastern border across Iran is also Kurdish in Rojava. And then north, Bakur and Turkey, southeastern Turkey is all Kurdish. And then the western part of Syria, Rojava, is all Kurdish. So the Kurds got cut up into four different states between the Persians, the Turks, the British, and the French, and didn't get an independent state of their own at all. And then the Turkey managed to, out of the center of the Ottoman Empire, become a fairly successful independent republic. And then the Arab provinces, Syria and Lebanon, became independent states after being under French tutelage, Iraq and Jordan after being under British tutelage. But because the British and the French wanted to have kind of centralized control in Baghdad for the British and Damascus for the French, they kind of rejected the idea of having independent Kurdish state.
Okay, okay. Um, what are what? Okay, so you said you are in Iraq now, yes?
Technically, I'm in the state of Iraq, but I'm in a city called Sulaymaniyah. So what we have is the city of Sulaymaniyah is part of the governorate of Sulaymaniyah, which is part of the Kurdish region of Iraq. And things have changed because since I've been here. But what I have is right now is I am in uh, a region where I have a older residency card and residence and permit from the regional government, which I got before I got from Baghdad. And then after, well, because they didn't, Baghdad took that right back after the war in October when they took Kirkuk and after the referendum. And I have two visas and work permits from Baghdad, which I got later in my passport. So technically, it's kind of a proto state here, and it was more autonomous when I arrived 2 years ago. I didn't need to go through Baghdad at all as far as any paperwork when I originally got here. And then there was a referendum on independence, and as a result of that, the Iraqi federal forces took Kirkuk in combination with betrayal by one of the military leaders in Kirkuk. And since then, there's been a rollback autonomy here in Kurdistan. So I've had to get residency and work permits from the federal government in Iraq as well as the regional government here in Erbil. So they were almost de facto an independent state when I first got here, and now they have a lot less autonomy because they overplayed their hand and did not do any follow-up.
What was the overplaying of the hand? What was the lack of follow-up?
Well, the government in Erbil, which is controlled by the Kurdistan Democratic Party, and the area I'm in is controlled by a different party. It's controlled by the Patriotic Union of Kurdistan. The Kurdish government said we're going to have a referendum on independence, and the government in Baghdad said no, you can't do that. And then the government surrounding, particularly in Turkey, Ankara, and to a lesser extent Iran and Tehran, said no, you can't do that. And then the European Union, United States said we don't think that's a good idea either. We're not going to back you. But then the government, both major parties, the KDP and the PUK, said no, we're going to have a referendum on independence. Have a referendum on independence. Kurds are going to be able to vote on self-determination. So they have the vote, and it passes overwhelmingly. And immediately the Iranians shut the border, the Turks shut the border, and the Iraqi army invades the cities that were taken by the Kurds during the war against ISIS, but we're not technically in the territory of the Kurdish region set by the Iraqi constitution. So they were Kurdish administrated de facto, but de jure outside of it. So all those territories were taken by the Iraqi army. And the reason they were able to take Kirkuk is the PUK militia, Peshmerga there under Bafel Talabani, had cut a deal ahead of time with the Iranians and the government in Baghdad. So basically, rather than taking it by fighting, basically the head of the Iranian intelligence, Suleiman, basically got the Kurdish forces that were in Kirkuk to sell out the city to the Iraqi government in Baghdad.
What a douche.
Yeah. And then he fled to Baghdad.
Oh man, that sucks.
The Kurdish word is Josh, which means little donkey, but it's a very bad word for traitor.
Nice, Josh. Okay, I'm gonna remember that. That's nice. Okay.
So as a result, we lost control of the airports. They lost control of immigration. They lost a lot of the autonomy that they had previously managed to kind of push up again. And they're still split. We just had elections, but in both here regionally and in Baghdad. But yesterday I read that they had set the warehouse with the ballots for the elections for the federal government on fire so there would be no evidence of their cheating.
Oh my God. Oh geez, that sounds. Oh my God. Yeah, because I don't know. It's hard to explain, but now, especially whenever I hear of like an ethnic group that wishes to assert its independence and sovereignty, I'm always like, oh yeah, man, right on. That sounds really cool. And to hear about the Kurds essentially going for, yeah, what you're talking about with self-determination, yeah, it sucks to hear about their getting shafted by just about everybody. I remember on Poll for just a little while, there were threads and updates about what was going on in, I guess, what one could call Kurdistan. And yeah, it was weird. Like, it was in some cases down to like which blocks were under control. It was a hell of a thing. Have you seen any of the goings on with that? Have you seen any of the like infighting or whatever?
No, because I mean most of that was over in Kirkuk, which is south of here,
Okay.
and it was never part of the legal, as I said, but it was at one time majority Kurdish, and then it became heavily Arabized by ethnic cleansing under Saddam, and then after the war against ISIS, when the Kurdish Peshmerga took the city, they started to facilitate the return of people who had been forced out by Saddam Hussein. So it became majority Kurdish again. I don't know what it is now. A lot of Kurds fled after the October War, which I just detailed. But that's where you have, because there was a much larger Arab and also Turkmen, who were descendants of Turkish settlers sent during the Ottoman population. Because here in Suleimania, the only Arabs really are either displaced people from like Mosul, other parts of Iraq, or Syrian refugees, or my students aren't refugees or displaced persons, but they're from other parts of Iraq, the Arab one. But those people, they're coming in kind of at the grace of the Kurds, the refugees and displaced persons, and there's not a huge number of them. So they're not colonial settlers in the sense the people sent by Saddam Hussein were.
Yeah.
So basically, this is predominantly Kurdish area, and so. And as I said, most of the Arabs are people that have come here voluntarily as refugees or displaced persons to escape uh, being killed by ISIS. A lot of them.
That's a hell of a thing. How do the Kurds regard the Arabs?
It varies. In practical terms, it's pretty good. Uh, there's not there is discrimination and prejudice, but there's not a whole lot. For the most part, the Arabs coming from Syria or coming from parts of Iraq that were under ISIS control for a while much prefer to be here. But there's also uh, a prejudice among a number of Kurds, kind of like, well, all Arabs can be associated with the Arab regime under Saddam Hussein, the Ba'athists, and the genocide in Halabja, which is very close to where I am. I could get in a car and be in Halabja in like 20 minutes, where they killed 5,000 people with poison gas in a single day in 1988.
Jeez. It's really hardcore. You're like in a really rough part of the world right now, it sounds like.
It's actually really calm and really laid back here in Sulaymaniyah. It's kind of like a small little peaceful town. Not a lot coming. I mean, there's stuff surrounding it. It's like the bubble within the bubble in the bubbles. Like my favorite restaurant. There's two of them. They keep moving the guy. The head waiter is about 10 years younger than me, but he was a middle school teacher in Damascus, but he's Kurdish from Syria. And basically, when Syria fell apart, he joined the YPG, which were the Kurdish militias fighting against ISIS, and fought his way across the river to here. And now he's a waiter.
That's awesome. I don't know. A battle-hardened waiter sounds great.
Oh, they're all over, because all the people here, because of the oil, the Kurds in Iraq, and because of the autonomous government, they don't do any of the menial work. A lot of the menial work is done by these Kurdish refugees from Syria, and most of the men were veteran YPG, People's Defense Units, fighting against the ISIS. So before I was told I had to quit smoking by the heart doctors, I went to this place with Botan, and Botan introduced me to a guy named Aziz, and who was the guy who tended my nargila, my water pipe. And he said, for the last 2 years, he's been fighting and killing Daesh. You should tip him well.
Oh my God. That's hardcore. I mean, oh my God. I actually I can't ask this in good conscience because like I've never met you, I don't know you, but I would love to have a conversation with those people. Or if you could relay stories about those people and their weird travails and stories, I would be all about that. That sounds fantastic. Oh my gosh. Now, this is one more gear switch. I want to come back to what's going on in Kurdistan, or the Kurdistans, I guess. But I can't help but ask, because you're in the general vicinity, do you know anything about what's going on with the Assyrians? Hello? Oh no. Oh no. It locked up. No! Oh my gosh. Oh no, it locked up. No. No. Oh,
I'm sorry, my power went out briefly.
Okay.
I didn't hear what you said. We don't have the most reliable electricity here.
Okay.
So it's better than when I was in Ghana and only got 12 hours every 36 hours.
Well, I'm excited that you're back. This is excellent news. Okay. I'm gonna cross my fingers and turn around 3 times. Well, I'll pretend to turn around 3 times and then hope that the power doesn't go out again. If you don't mind my asking, do you know anything about the Assyrians?
Yeah, I know a little bit about them.
Do you know what's going on with them?
Not particularly. I mean, there is a Syrian population here. My understanding is that they haven't had a good lot, really.
Oh, are we back?
Hello? Yeah,
Yeah,
I think we're back. I don't know what happened there. It just cut me off.
it's okay.
Assyrians haven't had a good lot since for a while. I know that they were one of the groups that the Ottoman targeted during World War One for massacres, particularly in Urima over in the Iranian side of the border. They crossed over into Iran and slaughtered a lot of them.
Yeah. Yeah, I ask because I was many, many months ago, I think it must have been over a year by now, there was the Dave Rubin report back when I used to watch his show much more frequently. He had on a general, well, a military guy. I don't actually, now that I think about it, recall exactly what his role was, but he was from some part of the Middle East where the Assyrians happened to reside. And it was heartbreaking to watch the interview because he was so wooden and uncomfortable. And he was not good at media in the least. He was not personable. And yet he was talking about, and Dave Rubin was doing everything he could to try to draw out something from the guy that was a little easier on the camera and easier on the eyes, but it was just impossible. And the guy was basically detailing the slow death of the Assyrians. And ever since then, I've just had it in my mind to know kind of what's going on. And yeah, just as you were saying, apparently they've had a really bad run. My understanding is that according to this military guy from like a year and change ago, they're down to a couple 100,000 people or something. So this used to
Oh
be a
wow!
population of, millions, I think, and they're
They were
down
about a
to,
million in the 80s.
yeah, and they're down to like they're down to basically the population of the city that I live in, really. It's nothing. That's absolutely nothing. And nobody know like
Yeah, and lots of them have gone to Chicago and Detroit. They're no longer living here in the Middle East.
oh, I should check that out. I should like proper I should check that out and see what's going on because the yeah, it just sucks. I keep hearing all these horror stories about these populations that keep getting either it's not that they keep getting massacred. It makes it sound like they're regenerating and coming back. They're not coming back. But I keep hearing stories of populations that are getting massacred or genocided, whether hard or soft. I heard a little while ago on some stream associated somewhere that even the Tibetans, if the projections hold, the Tibetans, same thing. They're actually going to be on the way out. It just sucks to hear about all these stories of like these small populations that are clinging barely to life. It's horrifying. Anyway, the Assyrians were just an idea that sprung to mind spontaneously. But back to the Kurds. So you're in a safe bubble. How did you get to where you are? What drew you to live in that part of Iraq? Oh no. Oh no, the power went out again. Oh no. Oh no. Otto, are you there? Oh my gosh. This is such a bummer. Oh, you back?
Yeah, I'm back. It just goes off for a little bit and back on the air conditioning.
It's fine. Hey, you know what? I'm happy to hang out for as long as you're happy to hang out. Even with the interruptions, I'm down.
The interruptions are brief, but they're really annoying. I almost hate them longer than the longer blackouts because it's like you have electricity for a little while and then they take it away from you. You have a little bit of hope.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Well,
Yeah, the Assyrians.
oh no, it has it again. Oh, he'll come back. He'll come back. Okay. I'm just gonna hang out for the next few moments and feel bummed out because he's not here. Oh, 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 you back?
Yeah, I'm back. Evidently, it has to reboot after the power goes, but it does it delayed.
Not even a problem. Like I say, not even a problem. Go
And then
on.
her father was an oil engineer, so they lived in Saudi Arabia and then went to Europe and ended up in the U.S.
And you're referring
That
to
was the first time
your
I'd
what?
ever heard of them.
Oh, you're referring to
Uh,
the Assyrians now.
yeah, yeah, like in the 80s. Um, but even then, it seemed like an impossible situation because they're scattered among Persians and Arabs and Kurds. And like, there's a minority of Assyrians here, and the Kurds are sympathetic to them. But I mean, they don't have a concentrated population or territory that they can really get. So like, their best bet is to like, well, we can have autonomy under the Kurds, and they're more sympathetic to us than the Arab or the Persian. But reestablishing any kind of modern Assyrian nation state almost seems impossible, and so they can't like get full self-determination.
Do you personally know any Assyrians?
Here I don't, but when I went to Dohuk during Christmas, I saw a lot of Assyrian churches. Dohuk is up in the north here of Kurdistan.
All right. Did you find? I mean, have you ever had any interactions with Syrian? I'm just curious to know what
And
they
when I
tell
was
you.
growing up, I knew some Assyrians in California, but they had come from the other side of the border in Iran.
Oh, okay. What were they like?
They're very nice people. I mean, they make a big deal of being the descendants of ancient Assyrian culture.
Yeah,
They make a big deal of being kind of the most longest continuous uh, Christian population in the uh, areas of Iraq and Iran, uh, going back to the Nestorian Church.
it sounds like just a hell of a thing. Yeah, same. I would love to have interactions with Assyrians at some point. I don't really have. Yeah, it's so lame. In California, most of my interactions are just with like other normal white people or black people or Mexicans, and after a while, it's sort of like, yep, I've heard all the stories. I know what it's like. It's kind of weird. Something about talking to an Assyrian sounds like it'd be kind of fun. Anyway, go on.
I think there are other Assyrians in Orange County because this is where I grew up, and my mother's still there, and they have a huge Persian population there. I know.
Yeah, we have a lot of Persians north of where I live. Well, actually, I guess it's north and west a little bit. And yeah, they're actually they're super cool. Most of the Persians that are where I am, they are Jewish, and so they kind of overlap with the Ashkenazi and the Hasids only in the sense that they inhabit portions of the city that are next door to each other, but they don't really interact with each other. It's kind of weird.
Hmm.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Just thinking about
No, sorry.
the
So,
whole.
but I don't know a lot about the Assyrians, simply because there's so few of them. Uh, and in Sulemania, there is not where they live. They live further north. As I said, I saw Assyrian churches when I was in Dohuk, which
No.
is up close by the Turkish border. I'm
So,
near the Iranian border.
oh, okay, okay. I'm gonna have to Google map all of this to figure out what more or less because my geography is not what it should be. I'm painfully aware of this, and I know basically nothing about geography. I think somewhere around my cutoff point is about Las Vegas. That's where my geography stops. So it sucks. What are you gonna do? Anyway, I wanted. Oh, what was? Oh, I had a question and I forgot the question. Oh no. Oh yeah, that's right. What what brought you to Iraq? What was? How did you find yourself there?
I was working in Ghana, at the University of Ghana in Legon, and I had arrived there in 2011 from Kyrgyzstan, and I was in the history department. Now, what happened in Ghana is that even though the country was at peace, it had the world's worst performing currency in 2013, worse than Syria or Ukraine, which were both fighting wars at the time.
Jeez.
So since I was being paid in local currency, I lost like 75% of my purchasing power. I went from like $1,500 a month to like $750 a month, even though I've been working right for much
Oh,
longer.
God.
And so I had a wife and kids still in Kyrgyzstan. I was like, this is not going to work. If the currency keeps getting devalued and I need to buy things like plane tickets and in US dollars or euros or right, send US dollars abroad, and I getting paid in money that keeps losing its value because the demand for dollars is so much higher than the demand for the Ghanaian CD. It's not as much as I love working in Ghana. I can't do it for free.
Yeah.
Uh, so a guy I knew when I was in London, when I was doing my master's and PhD, and he was an undergraduate at the time, considerably younger, had been teaching here. He himself is half Kurdish, half Welsh. He got a job at University of Missouri. He said, "There's openings. You should apply." And so I applied. And the first year, they ended up not hiring anybody because the administration, which changed the year I came in, was totally screwed up. But the second time, uh, they hired me, and they hired me while I was in Kyrgyzstan visiting my wife and kids. So I just didn't go back to Ghana and came here because
Nice.
the pay was literally, in addition to free housing, they gave me, let me see, yeah, they gave me 500% what I was earning in Ghana in terms of salary.
Nice. How
Um,
can you turn
so
that down?
I didn't.
Yeah, it's impossible. So what has it been? I mean, you were saying because I guess I'm now curious about the transition. So you were saying that you started out rather when you first arrived. Your first experiences were of an autonomous region, and
Yes.
that slowly rolled back to being more
Well, it wasn't slow. There
associated.
was a battle in October. It lasted about 15 hours, in which the Kurds got defeated, technically, because one of the Kurdish Peshmerga units under Bafal Talabani defected to the Iraqis.
Oh yeah. So basically, it was just down to like one battle, and just out of nowhere, not
Well,
out
it
of
wasn't out of
nowhere.
nowhere. Everybody knew it was going to come,
Yeah.
but nobody knew that the Iranian intelligence had already brokered a victory without having to fight. I mean, the Iranians controlled the Shiite militias in Iraq, which were the main fighting force that went into Kirkuk.
All right. So it kind of sounds like, and I know very little about Middle Eastern politics. It's not really, it's not my focus. But it sounds as though, from your description, there actually is a lot of influence coming from Iran. Is that
Yes. Um, with the fall of all of Iran's neighboring enemies, the Taliban in Afghanistan and Saddam Hussein in Iraq, uh, the Iranians have been able to project influence outside their borders to a greater extent than any time since the Sassanids, because the Ottoman Empire is not there to block them. So they can project power all the way into Lebanon.
that's interesting? Because I remember hearing about how there's a lot of Iranian money going into PLO, and at the time I was confused by that, but at least I think it was the PLO.
It might have been the Iranians support whoever they think will be in their interest, but they have a huge amount of influence in the regional government here under the PUK in Suleimania. Economically, I mean, most of the things that I end up buying, like the yummy beverages here, are all produced in Iran. I mean, they dominate the economy here. Uh, but yeah, they politically, militarily, economically, they have a lot of influence in Iraq, a lot of influence in Syria, a lot of influence in Lebanon.
Hmm. What do you, again, because I simply don't know outside of what the propagandists tell me. Um, what do you think is going on with Iranian influence in the various regions? What do you think their goals are? What do you think they're trying for?
Well, I think a lot of it just straight up, we want to make Iran great again. This is the first time since the Sassanids that we can get to the Mediterranean, right? Make Persia great again.
You think they want to? You think they're going into an expansionist mindset?
Well, certainly in terms of ability to control things, yeah. I mean, they basically control a lot of de facto, as I said, political and economic going on here in Iraq, and they are definitely much more influential in Syria since they intervened militarily in support of Assad, and the Hezbollah, which is their main ally in Lebanon, has gotten stronger recently.
Hmm. Hmm. All right. So basically, they're looking for power games. That's more or less what I'm gathering from this.
Well, that's what would be my think. I mean, I think there's a kind of an ideological tinge, kind of a Shiite ideological justification and shield. Because, as I said, most of the Iraqi Arab they're Shiite, and there's quite a few Shiites in Lebanon and Syria as well. Also, a big part of it is, you define yourself by who you're not, your enemies. In this case, the enemy is Saudi Arabia, which is Arab and Sunni, as opposed to Persian and Shiite.
Oh yeah, I always forget about that big thing. Um, what what kinds of I mean, geez, yeah, the whole situation is so complex. Everyone just imagines that the Islamic world is this one big contiguous thing that is more or less homogenous and stable, and this is obviously at its face not the case. What kinds of conflicts do you see between Saudi Arabia and Iran? What's the nature of that conflict?
Well, basically, as I said, the Iranians are more powerful to their west now than they've been at any time since uh, before Islam came to Persia, because the Ottomans were able to block them from moving into places like Syria and Lebanon for centuries. And the Saudis are scared to death of this. The Saudis do not want a Persian Shiite dominated Middle East. They want a Middle East dominated by them, which is a, a form of Hanbali Sunni Islam, but it's also heavily Arab and not Persian.
Is there the possibility of Iran more or less controlling that region?
It's possible because the Iranian intelligence under Suleiman is very, very good, very smart. But the Saudis have powerful allies, most notably the United States, but also Israel. So Iran doesn't have the resources that Saudi Arabia can tap into with its alliance system.
Hmm. Because this is only semi-related. I remember hearing about how back in '79, Saudi Arabia wanted to export all of they made a pact. There was some kind of crazy like coup that happened in Saudi Arabia where some weird sect of Islam they went into some Arabian palace or whatever, and they got up
No,
to
they seized Mecca, and they had to bring in French special forces, and the French special forces had to formally convert to Islam before they could be allowed to go in and take these guys out.
yeah. Do you think there's anything to the idea of a weakening Arabian Peninsula? It's something about
Yeah, I think internally both the governments of Saudi Arabia and Iran are weakening, even as they're attempting to expand their power into even weaker places like Iraq and Syria.
because I'm very curious about and just could you relay what happened in '79 for the people listening?
There was a Islamist movement that was opposed to the monarchy. They thought they had sold out Islamic principles, so they seized the holy sites in Mecca, and were holding it. And the Saudi government invited in the French military forces, and they had to first convert to Islam. But the French went in there and basically killed them all, and returned the sites to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia.
Do you know the conditions of that? Because there was my understanding is that there is an agreement that was met between the rogue group and also the Arabic monarchy. Do you know anything about the terms of that agreement?
Uh, I don't. I have a book. I think I can might be have it in it. Look it up.
Yeah, the I remember hearing about how there's one term that struck me, or it popped out as being important, and it was that the Saudis said we're not going to allow any more terrorism within our borders. Instead,
Yeah,
we're
this is
going
true.
to
That is true.
yeah, we'll go ahead and make sure that all the terrorism is exported to the rest of the world. So you can do whatever you want out there, out in Dar al Harb. You may not
No,
do
no,
it.
they can do it against other Islamic places. The certainly the terrorist attack in Tehran
Oh yeah,
had connected with the Saudis, and a lot of the groups engaged in terrorist attacks here in Iraq and across the border in Syria have connections with
right.
Saudi Arabia.
Well, I only refer to the idea of exporting it outside of the borders of Saudi Arabia.
Right, but they're exporting it to other people who are Muslim as well.
Yeah, precisely. Yeah, exactly. What is it? The old Mortadine problem. Um, because the reason that I think about this is because there are a couple of attacks in Saudi Arabia, one or two, like either in Mecca or like right up against it. Did you hear about those?
No, I just heard about the one in Kabul because I have people I know at the American University of Afghanistan or had been former students of mine in American University of Central Asia or former colleagues that are there. But the one English professor I knew just marked himself safe.
Okay. Well, that's good news. Um, yeah, the in Saudi Arabia there were a couple of attacks that were either in or up against Mecca. And I think it was late last year or early this year. I don't remember, but it was a while back. And it just struck me. I keep saying that phrase. I need to find a new phrase. Um, it piqued my interest because it suggested that there was a loss of control with regards to terrorism within the borders of Saudi Arabia, and it hearkened to the idea that their little pact might be failing. And I was wondering if you had any thoughts about that.
That may be true. My impression here is that the current leadership of Saudi Arabia, since the death of the old king not too long ago, is no match for a number of the other players in the Middle East, particularly the Iranian intelligence under Soleiman. I, they're just not at the same level of competence.
What are some of the things that they're doing that aren't so good?
Uh, they basically have lost in Iraq and Syria to the Iranians.
Oh, right, right, proxy wars.
Yeah,
So the okay, all right. I think I'm starting to get a better hold on the situation. So there are proxy wars happening in contested territories. Good God, this sounds like Orwell's 1984. Anyway, there are proxy wars.
welcome to the Middle East.
Yeah, yeah, basically. And at the moment, the two of the bigger players within the proxy wars are Saudi Arabia and Iran, and Saudi Arabia
Correct.
is, in some sense, getting its ass handed to them by a combination of I guess, the indigenous population, and then also the indigenous population as being backed by Iran.
Correct.
Okay, all right. Is there any? Well, do you have any other thoughts about that situation that I haven't touched on or that are relevant or important?
Well, the point of view of the United States, since we're very closely allied with Saudi Arabia and quite hostile to Iran, that means U.S. influence will shrink if the Iranians manage to be successful at the expense of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's funny. Yeah, because I remember back in the mid 2000s there was this weird obsession with Iran, and even all the way into the Obama administration, there is a peculiar fixation on Iran, and it didn't make any sense if you only look at whatever is going on in the public sphere. If you only look at what's going on, like what CNN is reporting, or what MSNBC or even Fox, they don't talk about any of these proxy wars. They don't talk about any of the other things that are going on. They just basically say, hey, we got to bomb Iran for some reason, and assume that you're going to just say, oh yeah, of course we have to bomb Iran because it was said on the news. And I kind of feel like I'm starting to get a slightly better picture as to why the political class are so interested in Iran if you see it from a proxy war standpoint. But that sucks, man, because that basically means that the U.S. is also engaging in all of these proxy wars, and they have to front like they're not doing that, even they totally are. But
Right.
they're, oh god damn, what a clusterfuck.
I mean, the U.S. is obviously heavily backing the Saudis. The Saudis don't produce weapons in
Yeah,
the wars in places like Yemen, right?
yeah, yeah. It's funny because back in 2016, when I was researching Islam, I spent a lot of time looking into just what was going on in the Middle East, just as, from a cursory glance standpoint. Not that I'm clearly not even an amateur or novice with regards to Middle Eastern knowledge, but I did play a little mental exercise with myself at one point, and I asked myself, what do they produce? What do they actually make? What do they build? What do they manufacture? What do they grow? And weirdly, I came up with very little. Like they don't have much of a, it's hard to farm out there. They don't have any major brands of anything that comes out of the Middle East that I know of anyway that's sold on the global market. It's just kind of, I don't know, it's just kind of odd. It seems as though, especially in Saudi Arabia, they're basically beholden to whatever agreements that they can forge for commerce in order to be alive. I mean, I don't know how they survive outside of importation.
Yeah, well, that's just common with most of the world. They export a commodity and then use the money for that to import everything. So in uh, Iraq is even worse than Saudi Arabia in terms of percentage of oil as the GDP. The most diversified economies here are Turkey and then Iran, uh, as far as the large countries. But yeah, they export the oil and then import everything else. But it puts them in a better situation. I mean, like Ghana exported cocoa, which was chocolate, and then imported everything else. And their country, they export cotton and then import everything else. And this is kind of a lot of the economies of places in Africa and parts of Asia, the Middle East. They just have one commodity to export, and everything else is imported.
That's so weird. That's so funny. Yeah, so basically the entire, yeah, it sounds awful because, well, I mean, side tangent that has absolutely nothing to do with anything, but whenever I think about all those preppers that are like, oh, we have to prepare for this, that, and the other thing, and it's like, dude, in the Middle East, you can't do that. You can't just go to the woods. You can't just, decide that you're gonna have your own backyard garden or something like that. I mean, how do the Kurds get through all of their weird like battles and wars and so on? Because I mean, they have to be backed by someone. Who are they being backed by? How do they get the resources?
Well, the area I am in, all right, Sulaymaniyah, the main political power, the Patriotic Union of Kurdistan, is backed by Iran. In the north, Erbil and Dohuk, including the government of the Kurdish regional, is controlled by the Kurdistan Democratic Party, which is backed by Turkey. But they have taken whatever allies they can get. So here in Iraq, for instance, before the PUK split from the KDP in 1975, they were being backed by Iran under the Shah and the United States and Israel. But then the Iranians pulled the rug under them. They no longer had a territorial base from which to operate.
Okay.
And that was
I
in
just wanted to
75.
go on.
But other Kurdish groups like the PKK, which is the anti-Turkish group that was fighting against Turkey in the 1980s. They were backed by Syria because the Syrians had a beef with Turkey over the Euphrates River. Right, so the Turks like dammed up the river, so the Syrians say, "Okay, we'll support the Kurdish guerrillas against you."
Jeez. It's not only proxy wars, but also kind of like proxy support as well.
Yeah, well, obviously, I mean the Iranians and the Israelis and the Americans supported the Kurds from 66 to 75 as a way of weakening the Iraq, which was the primary enemy of Iran and also a lesser enemy of Israel. But I mean, obviously, the Shah of Iran didn't care one way or the other about Kurdish independence or autonomy in Iraq. He had his own Kurds in Iran that he didn't give freedom to.
Oh man, so actually it kind of sounds like the Kurds are basically being played as pawns against multiple groups and for and by multiple groups. So the
This
only
is
ones.
this has been the case since the border was drawn between the Safavids and the Ottomans, basically at the same place it is now between Iraq and Iran. But basically, yeah, there's always been Kurdish groups that are allied with the Ottomans, the Turks today, or the Iranians. And the Kurds have many enemies, and their worst enemy is themselves.
How do you mean? Why?
Because they never unified. Rather than unifying and fighting against their external enemies, they're always fighting amongst themselves, allied with these foreign powers in Turkey or Iran or Iraq.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. That's right.
In 92 to 96, there was a civil war here in the Kurdish region between the KDP and the PUK. The PUK invited in the Iranians, and the KDP invited in the Baathists, the people that gashed the Kurds in '88.
Jeez. That's the
And this
most
is so
ridiculous
that one
thing.
Kurdish Peshmerga can fight another Kurdish Peshmerga. All right, so one group invites the Iranians in, the other group invites the Saddam Hussein's forces in.
Oh my God. That's oh jeez. So not only are they being played as pawns, they're also fighting against each other. So it's like, yeah, it's almost like those retarded four-way chess games or something, where you basically you've got all this weird infighting between multiple groups, and it's kind of hard to plan for moves because you could just get sideswiped by the next guy over, and it wouldn't even matter. Jeez. Yeah, that sounds like a hell of a thing. Otto, I gotta go ahead and just make mention.
No problem.
Typically by this point, I would have either played music so I could eat some peanut butter, or I would have signed off. I want to keep talking for a little while longer, but I do actually feel myself kind of winding down just a touch. I only mention that because I don't want it to appear rude when I
Oh
say,
no,
okay,
it's fine.
okay.
You can go get peanut butter. I'm cool.
Well, I'm just gonna have like a spoonful, but while I have my peanut butter, could you tell me about something that's interesting that I haven't touched on that's going on within the region that you think maybe people should know about?
Oh.
That's a weird question. I know it's a weird question.
You know, the way I look at it is that things don't move fast in terms of advancement. So while I believe that there is hope to create a strong, independent, and prosperous Kurdistan, it's not something that's going to happen during my lifetime. I mean, I need to like lay the foundations here, and my part of it is very small, but I think I can like improve, a number of individuals, right, one brain at a time, through education, and to provide, the movement towards a leadership. But it's all got to start at the bottom up. The Kurds always think, well, we'll elect a new government and we'll have it from the top down, and that never works. I think the real nation building, for it to be real, has to start from the bottom up. And so it's nice that you see Kurdish flags here all over the place, but it'd be a lot more substantial base for real independence if instead of everything I buy coming from Iran was actually produced here by Kurds in Kurdistan.
That's interesting. That is very interesting. It reminds me of some of the discussions of the ethnash people in America who wish for something like I guess a white ethno state or something, and the lack of willpower to do anything about it. You see all the infighting that's going on here, and your mention of Kurdish-made products kind of reminds me of that just a little bit. Like that would be like they're not doing that, but it would be a good direction to go, because then they would be making their own stuff. They'd be trading using their own materials. They'd
Right.
be quote unquote adding value or whatever. It's a stronger position. It's a much more stable position.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, one of the and this is only loosely associated, and it's a tangent. I apologize. It's just a thought
No
that came
problem.
into my mind. I think that there's almost a comparison that one could draw between the white ethnash people in Europe and in America, and also with the Kurds, only in the sense of having an ethnic group that wishes for autonomy. Do you kind of see the parallel?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Certainly. I mean, but I mean that's true with all ethno-nationalist movements. I mean, the idea of a nation is you have an ethnic group of people with a common culture, a common history, and therefore a common destiny that wish to exercise their own rule over that destiny rather than have foreigners who have a different history and a different culture do it for them.
Yeah. In particular, I'm thinking about the infighting. I'm thinking about the lack of unity within the Kurds.
This
That's really
is a main problem.
yeah, because basically, since they're all in a circle, you described basically 4 quadrants. They're always
Yeah.
punching right, no matter where they are. They're always punching right, and they always manage to end up punching themselves in the end.
A lot of the times, yeah.
Geez, have there been any positive advancements with the Kurds recently?
Well, it's been pretty bad recently because of the loss of Kirkuk to the Iraqi federal forces and the rollback of autonomy. They lost control of the airports. They lost control of immigration. But I think these things have to be seen in terms of long term. So, I mean, since the establishment of the no-fly zone and the development of the Kurdish region, the Kurds have had more autonomy than they've had at least since the 18th century here. So certainly more than they had since any modern time of Iraqi independence after 1932. So that's still there, but I think the problem is all of the current political leadership are old and still thinking in old terms, and they've got to be replaced. I mean, I'm a generation kind of in the middle. Kurds my age are not going to be the ones taking the leadership. It's going to be the people that are the age of my students. So in that sense, there's some hope, but it's going to take a long time. I don't see it coming anytime fast.
All right, fair enough. Fair enough. Well, would you mind if we switch gears just very briefly to this is kind of out of left field. I have this thing, as I'm sure you must have noticed, about the red pill experience. I'm not looking for you to go into a huge, like, hour-long diatribe or anything, because I don't want to take too much more of your time. But if you don't mind my asking, what do you think about the red pill experience, and how is your experience?
Uh, I don't know. I don't really think in terms. I mean, I take some white pills and some orange pills every day
How's that?
uh, for my cardiac problems.
Nice, nice. The ultimate white
Uh,
pill, the one for survival.
basically, I've always been kind of like an old school paleo-conservative, kind of Pat Buchanan type influence, the old National Review from before it became a piece of shit.
Yeah. So it sounds like you kind of had a natural inclination to view reality more or less for itself. That's my current conception for the red pill experience, is to go from having a silly worldview to a more sensical worldview, um, going from not understanding certain things about reality to understanding certain things about reality. And the experience tends to be a negative experience. You tend to have a bad time with it, and that's why I refer to it as the red pill experience. Because it's just it's an easy shorthand more than anything else. I do think that the word red pill is bandied about a bit much, especially now that I've started using it for my little series. Strangely, I don't want to use it anymore. Um, but yeah, I guess the idea here is that it's inapplicable to you. It seems like you kind of were. Uh, am I, is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in Southern California, and my neighbors, uh, they were born in the U.S., but their parents had been born in Lithuania and had fled uh, when the Soviets came back in, and they were very active movement to restore independence. And this was back when nobody thought the Baltic states would ever get independence again. But they all had connections, family, and friends who they fought in the Forest Brethren in the late 40s and early 50s against the Soviets. They had some old bullets that had been used that they would show off. Uh, and so I kind of hung out with them, and it got me kind of interested in uh, Soviet nationality policies. And, that's why I ended up studying deported nationalities in Central Asia. Uh, but they obviously were not coming from any type of left-wing point of view, having the families that I mean, the old grandma Baba. She was a concert pianist, and she had to like dig trenches for the Germans as payment to get along with the convoy to get out of Lithuania as the Soviet Red Army came back in 1945.
Jeez, it's really hardcore, man. How old
Yeah,
were you when you met these people?
like 14.
Yeah, so it sounds like I mean, yeah, the red pill, more or less, for me, refers to a person that is indoctrinated and then kind of gets past the indoctrination program. It sounds like you were inoculated to that in a way.
Maybe. Well, I mean, it's not like it was a shortage of refugees from communism in Central Europe in parts of the U.S. I mean, my father uh, remembers, and he was a boy right after the Hungarian Revolution, the old Turnverein, which had all been German, got an influx of Hungarians, and there was a whole new big revival of European football because of these refugees that had fled the crushing of the Hungarian Revolution,
Oh yeah, yeah,
and that was in Sacramento,
yeah,
Northernland.
yeah, yeah. There was a lot of Eastern Europeans. They came to my section of Los Angeles in the 1990s because of the whole Serbia Bosnia conflict, and there was actually there are little tiny sections here and there where, yeah, it's like it's difficult to explain. It doesn't make any sense unless you actually see it. But you'll see these guys that have like $100,000 cars. They have $1,000 loafers, and they're wearing like jewelry, but they're dressed in like shorts and a wife beater. And then they eat at like these outdoor cafes, and you'll see them like in specific sections of Los Angeles. And it's sort of like, I mean, you're referring to a revival of football, so I guess I'm not referring to anything of the sort. But it's weird that you can see these little markers of a particular culture as they kind of like just come in and they just flow into the area. And yeah, if I had known these people, because I happened to know back in the mid 2000s some of these people, some of these ex-Serbs, and they would on occasion they would talk about their stories, and one of them they actually were taking sniper fire on the last days of their being there. They weren't hit. I think they were describing the situation as the sniper wasn't intending to kill them. They just wanted to scare them, which is just as freaky in my opinion. And it's like, yeah, the good God. I wonder if they didn't talk about that story too much, but I recognized that that was an important thing in general to understand that there were real life conflicts. They were they were outside of my sphere of knowledge, and only after the fact, only like a decade after, did I start to really grasp what the hell was going on in Bosnia and Serbia back in the 1990s. And I just imagined to myself, if I had known these people back when I was younger, back when I was in like maybe high school or maybe around that area, plus minus some years, maybe the indoctrination program wouldn't have been as strong on me. I don't know. Sometimes I think about these things. I just wonder, like, if there's. I mean, do you know people that have flipped their worldview? Have you met people who've done that?
Hmm. I have to think about it. Uh, uh, I, I don't know, but I remember reading that when the Gulag Archipelago came out in '74, won the Nobel Literature Prize, and they translated from Russian to French. That a lot of French intellectuals did a complete about face. They could no longer like deny the horrors of Stalinism, and so like the whole new French right was basically former communists who like, okay, we've now seen the light, and it was like very rapid, like within a year or two in the mid
Really?
'70s.
Huh. That is interesting. I should look
Uh,
into that.
yeah,
Oh, God.
Jean-Francois Revel is one of the ones who flipped.
Yeah. Did you personally meet any of the people that flipped their mind?
I can't think that I did. I mean, uh, I'll have to give it some thought. I was thinking I was going to talk about London and national consciousness in Iraq.
Yeah, sorry.
It's all
That kind
right,
of
no problem.
out of left field. It's just it's a thing that I'm still trying to work on the idea of how people change their minds, what causes them to do so, and so on. I realized that I did not ask you, or rather, I didn't indicate that I would ask you about that. So I kind of sprung that on you. Sorry about that. That's my
No
bad.
problem.
So yeah, it's coming up on 2 hours now. So I kind of want to, for my own sake, because I'm weak and need sleep. I kind of want to wrap it up in a
Oh,
few
no problem.
minutes. Do you have any final things that you want to talk about?
Not really. It's been great to talk to you. Eki?
Yeah, okay, yeah, yeah.
Eke. All right. No, thanks a lot for having me on. This is the first time I've been on one of these things. So I think Babylonian Hebrew was supposed to have me on to talk about diasporas, but he hasn't gotten back to me. So if you see him, tell him that I'm still willing to do that.
Yeah, he'll probably end up shit posting on you. It's fine though. I love him. He's good. Yeah, actually, well, if he doesn't, then I will ask you about some diaspora stuff because you seem like you know about stuff sort of on the ground. I like that. I like it. I like it. Otto, thank you very much.
No problem. Thanks a
Thank you
lot
for
for having
popping
me.
by. Oh, one final question. This is the question that I was going to ask. Um,
Yeah.
how did you stumble upon my channel anyway?
I think I must have stumbled on it through one of the either directly from Luke Ford's show
Yeah,
or one of the mini satellites or children of the Luke Ford show that exists now.
yeah,
It's a never shrinking empire.
yeah.
And I'm trying to think how I stumbled upon Luke Ford's show. This is how. Uh, I about Christmas time, I was looking up something intellectually about what neo-reaction was, and I got to Jacobite magazine. And Jacobite magazine referred me to the distributed videos. And one of the people that he had that got connected to him for some reason was Stardusk. And Stardusk had Kai Chang on one of his videos, who does a lot of conversation with Frame Games. So then I was looking up Frame Games, and he was on one of the Luke Ford show, and that's where I think I found you.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah, yeah. That's funny. Yeah, sometimes it's fun to track these weird circuitous routes to how you ended up where you are. Yeah. All right. That's funny. That's neat. Cool. Hey, thank you.
All right,
Uh,
thanks a lot.
yeah. All right. I'm gonna take off. Thank you everyone for popping by. I appreciate it very much. And while I'm thinking about it, just for the sake of it, rule number one: treat every firearm like it's loaded. Rule number two: never cover or sweep anything that you're not willing to destroy. Rule number three: your finger stays off of the trigger until your sights are on target. And the fourth and final rule is be aware of your target and what's beyond it. Floss your teeth, drink a glass of water, get some exercise. Otto, thank you again.
All right, no problem.
All right. Cheers,
It was
everyone.
a
Bye
great
bye.
pleasure.
All right. Bye.